Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at a budget deck. This one in particular is Aggro Dragon. This is pulled straight from the Shadowverse 101 Reddit page, where you can find a few different budget decks that we will be covering in the next few days. A few people had asked for some budget decks, and I feel like now's a good time, since we've covered most of the other major decks, to cover some more cheaply orientated ones. Of course, we might try and fit in other decks here and there, but mostly I want to focus probably the next 3 days on budget decks, so hopefully you guys can enjoy that. This one in particular is actually really solid and reasonably cheap. Again, you can find all these decks on that page. I will leave it in the link in the description below, right below this deck list, and I will do the same for every video that I've pulled a deck from that thing. So hopefully you guys will be able to enjoy that. Okay, so this deck is, I believe, 9,500 vials total for the entire thing. That's pretty good. We're only running 3 golds there, 2 here, and 3 for your top end, with the Phoenix Rider being a really nice finisher and a really good source of damage. You can of course run something like PDK in this deck if you have them. It does work quite well. You can swap from an Aggro Dragon to a PDK Dragon, which work in a very similar manner. You can also put in a few different cards here and there, of course. Things like Dragon Oracle can work, although I don't recommend doing that because you do clutter your deck a little bit. And the Dragon Swords are perfect really for what you want when you're ramping anyway, for this deck in particular. Other than that though, it is really just a swarm the deck with low cost followers, deal damage, get as much as you can. When you have a big enough board, drop something like Phoenix Rider. You've also got Hippo, which is an extra storm damage. Then most of the time I usually go for Dragon Horde for an extra 4, which is really nice. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this, and we'll take a look at some quick games. So first up is Forest as our opponent. Forest decks are quite strong at the moment. That's where aggro decks like this can work quite well, because you can deal some good damage very early on and basically beat them out before they can beat you. The other fact is Forest does tend to need a lot of board presence to really do much, which you can actually counter pretty nicely with Rider by getting that extra damage to their face. So I do want to make sure I show off these decks as well as I possibly can, at least with the luck that I got. Starting off pretty reasonably, the 2-drops are your main core to starting out a hand. I don't like really playing Dragon Horde on 1, although it is occasional that I do. I find sometimes you do want to play it if you know what kind of matchup you're going into, or you just want to play it as one in the later turn to fill out your curve properly. Otherwise, everything else actually works pretty well. Breath of the Salamander in particular I like to use reasonably early on. As you just saw there, I did use the Maelstrom on curve, because I want to have the Maelstrom Dragon in hand in this case against Forest, which can put out a lot of threats. I'd rather get extra damage in as I can, instead of trying to wait till about turn 7 to really drop those Maelstrom Dragons and do plentiful damage. So
It's mealtime.
I'd rather be able to put other things in my hand at the same time. Fire Lizard is a great card against Forest, just because it does ping off fairies, especially when Brambles is on board like this. It's a pretty easy way to deal with them. We also have some other pretty good cards. I mean, we already got the Phoenix Rider, which is perfect in this hand. Dragoon Scyther works pretty nicely at limiting your opponent's board, and the Aquamarina, I don't know, that one is really quite good at just flowing out the board in general. And of course, Worm Rider is great. Not being attackable is a big advantage, especially in these kind of metas, where they just survive quite nicely, or they absorb damage, one or the other. You're either baiting out spells on that follow-up, or you're getting damage in. Both options are great. And as you see here, we do flood the board quite nicely, and get a little bit of damage in. Not so lucky though, they do actually do a pretty reasonable play, and make my life just a little more difficult.
You follow behind.
But it's not the worst case. I mean, they get a full clear. We actually have some pretty good cards to follow this up with in regards to being able to deal with it, especially since we drew that off the top. That really helps with the Fire Lizard clearing the 4-1 basically for free. The only disadvantage is that we can't really play anything else and have to now work with this current board, making things just a little more tricky there. The next turn is looking promising. So while this is an aggro deck, I do find that it tends to err on the slower side, so it's great at doing storm damage, but very rarely will you actually snowball the early game just because of how the low drops in Dragon work. It's not really similar to Aggro Sword or Aggro Bloods, which were really heavy damage dealers in the first 4 turns. This one tends to take off at about turn 4, where it can really throw really good damage to the board, just because you are waiting to get those storm effects to about turn 5 and turn 7, where you can do substantial storm damage. But usually when you do, it's pretty large bursts all at once, which makes it hard for your opponent to necessarily deal with all of that at once. So they do keep playing cards, which in my favour is quite good. We also get to use the Maelstrom Dragon for 2 and the Phoenix Raider for the rest of the damage that we would need to finish them off. So it worked out better than ever. That's the kind of hand that you really want to go for, really big burst turns, where you can just finish your opponent off. Next up, Portal. Portal's one of those decks that does have a lot of low cost followers as well, so you do find yourself trying to fight with the board a little more than you want to. They also do like to drag matches out, which can make your life a little more difficult. The only big advantage is Phoenix Raider is great in this kind of matchup as well, because they do tend to swarm the board quite effectively. So your Raider's always going to get some really nice damage to the face. I do wish we had some more 1-drops though, because all aggro decks really need at least a half decent 1-drop. So of course I go for the Dragon Sword because it's the only 2-drop I can play, and I want to contest Portal's board. Whether they go face or trade is completely up to them, but in my opinion, having something that I can at least contest them with is my best choice. And as far as it goes now, I may as well just get some damage in, because I can deal a lot more burst damage than Portal can at this point, and force them to take their trades. Which works really nicely, especially since they passed turn 4. Not having a turn 4 play is reasonably rare for Portal, but it really helped me in this matchup in particular. After all, this is a budget deck, so you of course aren't going to always be able to beat the more refined and stronger cards, especially legendaries, which can be quite difficult. But sometimes you do just require your opponent not to have something, and it's not always the worst case. So we get some good damage in, we get another Aqua Nerd, which is great. And we set up our board quite nicely. I mean, even if they clear something here, we probably won't want to go for the Raider. If they don't though, the Raider is an extreme amount of damage in turn 6.
Not set to its counter.
So even with this one card, it's not that bad. I mean, they're going to obviously clear the 4/4. They do leave up 4 followers though, and that's a nice boost to Phoenix Rider, sorry, I keep saying Raider, but it's actually Rider, so I do apologise for that. We do get Dragon Horde though, which is another really good card. But I do set up the Phoenix Rider here, because the damage that I can get with the Evolve is worth a fair bit. I mean, 7 to their face when I have Dragon Horde and Dragoon Scyther and the other Rider in my hand, all burst storm damage that could easily destroy Portal. Especially since we haven't seen any ward summoners, so we're not really worried about them blocking damage. So as far as everything else goes, it's a pretty easy win from here.
These flames will flare again.
So I think that shows off how this budget aggro dragon deck works. It's fairly reasonably consistent when it comes to doing stuff. It's just a matter of, does your opponent have better cards than you in the top end? Even if they do, you can quite easily sneak out wins just with the pure burst damage, as you saw there with most of the storm in this deck. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe. I'm sure this will help a lot of you new players out there, and even some players who just don't have enough cards to build a good dragon deck for daily missions. So I do hope you return for more budget decks, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.